So Chris Eubank Jr. outpoints Liam Williams over 12 rounds to win a unanimous decision in Cardiff. I'm a little bit late to the party, but nevertheless I want to give my take on this fight. This fight was just strange. It was weird, and I've heard a lot of people say that it was an odd fight, it was an odd performance. And see, I didn't watch this fight live. At the time as it was happening, I was getting live updates from Sky, but also the boxing Discord that Hatman has. And I'm obviously getting people's perceptions, and I'm thinking of it myself. And based on what people were saying at the time, I was thinking that Eubank Jr. was carrying Liam Williams, or carried him the distance, because of course Eubank Jr. scored 4 official knockdowns, though only the first 3 were legitimate. The 4th one wasn't. That was some BS. Clearly wasn't a knockdown. But the first 3 knockdowns happened within the first 4 rounds, and it looked as if Eubank Jr. was just going to blow Liam Williams away. But no, Liam Williams managed to get out of those rounds and go the full 12. And in my head I'm thinking, okay, is it just a case of Eubank Jr. carrying Liam Williams because he wants more rounds, or because he wants to really inflict some damage over Liam Williams? So that was what was going through my head, especially when you consider that Eubank did carry Marcus Morrison. But Marcus Morrison is a much lesser fighter than Liam Williams. I think many of us can agree on that. But when I watched the fight, because I've watched it just now, so it's pretty fresh in my memory, I think it was a combination of both Eubank Jr. carrying Liam Williams in spots, but also Liam Williams offering some resistance. Not necessarily in terms of offense, but not necessarily being that easy for Eubank Jr. to get to. And I'm going to touch on that because I believe it ties into Eubank Jr.'s development as a fighter. So Eubank Jr. has scored these knockdowns. What do I make of them? Well, 2 of the knockdowns came from a jab, which is very strange in itself. Once again, it's a strange performance. And Hatman touched on this because when you have a prolific jabber, someone who's known for having a hard and prolific and damaging jab, them scoring knockdowns with that jab, it's not out of the ordinary. It's a formidable weapon that they have. Whereas Eubank Jr., he's not a prolific jabber. His jab is underdeveloped, in my opinion. Not only is it one-dimensional, but he doesn't really articulate it to really in a way that's conducive to transmitting power, let's say, and punching with power, jabbing with power. That being said, some people are going to say, well, you're wrong because he floored Liam Williams. Well, I believe that there are a couple of reasons for that. 2 prominent reasons, and that's firstly because Liam Williams probably doesn't have the same punch resistance as he did after that Andrade fight, because he was really shell-shocked early in that Andrade fight. He was able to go the full 12 rounds then, but I think that fight has definitely taken something from him. It's reduced his punch resistance. And also, whenever he got jabbed by, the 2 knockdowns where he got knocked down by the jab, he was very much on the centre line and came in a straight line and essentially doubled the impact of the jab, because Eubank Jr., to his credit, did time it very well. So I believe that's kind of flattered Eubank slightly. The 3rd knockdown, I believe, was, or it's either the 2nd knockdown or the 3rd knockdown. But Eubank Jr., it was a bit more of a power shot. I think it was a left hook and it caught Liam Williams high on the head. That was more of your kind of less surprising knockdown because it came from a punch, being the left hook. That's Eubank Jr. throws with a considerable amount of speed and power. So it wasn't as concerning almost if you're thinking about Williams's punch resistance. But George Groves did this interview with Boxing Social, and I feel like he summed up this performance pretty well, where other than the knockdowns, it wasn't really that impressive from Eubank. And I wholeheartedly agree, because if you take away those knockdowns, which, look, the knockdowns happen, it contributes, but other than those knockdowns, Eubank Jr. really didn't do that much. He was actually, I want to say, almost negative at certain points. He was employing a lot of mobility, which I thought he'd do early to kind of unsettle Williams and force Williams to come forward at him. So but it was so much more than I expected. And I don't really know what's going on with Eubank Jr. right now. He's still developing under Roy Jones, but going forward, I believe he's going to have to seriously address certain elements to his boxing approach. Liam Williams came out, just to talk in it for a minute. He came out as I thought he would. He was coming forward, he was advancing, but he was quite measured in what he was doing. And I feel like Williams didn't get credit for his technique, especially with the feints. He adopted that very Adam Booth, relaxed, athletic style. And as he was coming forward, he did a good job of moving his head. Got some some good quality head movement. Very smooth technique, very refined. And he was using it to feint Eubank Jr. quite effectively. And Eubank Jr. didn't really respond to those feints in the most professional manner. He'd often just, if he got feinted, sometimes he would jab. Other times he'd kind of leap backwards and let his arms drift forward. And yeah, which is a little bit amateurish because, and George Groves pointed this out, it doesn't put you in a position where you're able to get any meaningful shots off. And that's precisely it. It's like just getting out of the way of the punch for the sake of it, and not necessarily thinking about the position you're going to end up in where you may be able to get an advantage. And so very amateurish from Eubank. But Williams, he had those good feints, but his problem was he had these good quality feints and he was able to bring himself off the centre line and test the waters to see if he's able to then commit to a punch. However, he wasn't actually, or it didn't seem like he was actually noting down Eubank's reaction to these feints. And therefore, you're missing half the battle. Having good feints is great, but you have to remember the purpose of the feint is to get an idea of how your opponent's going to react, so then you can tailor your approach to basically combat their response. But Williams wasn't doing that, which was a shame because I believe he could have had a lot more success. And now he did land some clean punches throughout the fight, but nothing that Eubank Jr., I want to say, felt. He landed some clean right hands and was able to, on a couple of occasions, time Eubank coming in, as I suspected he would be able to, because Eubank does rush in at times from the outside into close range. Williams just couldn't really dent Eubank Jr. because when he would land clean, it wasn't clean with the knuckles. And when he did line up a better quality shot, Eubank Jr. did a good job of rolling away in the same direction as the punch to take the sting out of it. So yeah, it wasn't the greatest fight to watch. I imagine live it was probably a bit more of a spectacle, but I've obviously seen it earlier today and it wasn't great. And Liam Williams, I believe, deserves credit for not only his heart, because to get knocked down 3 times early, and he was clearly hurt. These weren't like flash knockdowns. They were legitimate knockdowns where Liam Williams' legs looked shaky. He got up and I feel like he maintained his shape quite well going into the later rounds of the fight. He managed to kind of keep some tidy work going, but it was just too few and far between. Eubank Jr. on the other hand, other than the knockdowns, did not look great. And I see Eubank Jr. as an artist. You know, you have this kind of theme in boxing. Are you an artist or are you a scientist? I believe that once you get to a higher level, you'll be both. But you have to master the science and understand the fundamentals contained within the science of boxing before you can add your own personal flair and become an artist and use your experience to back up your flow of like during the fight. Whereas Eubank Jr. doesn't strike me as someone who truly understands the science of boxing. He lacks those fundamentals. If you look at the way he goes around the ring, he doesn't look like someone who has much pedigree, and it's because he doesn't. He won a couple of amateur tournaments, both in the UK and in the States, but he's not a high-level operator. He doesn't. In some aspects he is, especially on the inside. He's got a much better idea of effective boxing on the inside, but on the outside and mid-range, it's not great. And so Eubank Jr. is an artist. He likes to use his instincts and feel his way through a fight. He probably has like a very general preparation. He's leaves it to see what he waits until the fight to see what he can find, and then goes from there. And Roy Jones Jr. I feel was the same, but just to kind of a legendary status. So you have an artist, a legendary artist in Roy Jones Jr., who was gifted with tremendous athleticism, probably the best athlete in boxing history, or recorded boxing history. And he's kind of bringing up his apprentice artist. I feel like Eubank Jr. can benefit from some science, though. Is it in his nature? I personally don't think so. I don't think so. However, I do believe that he needs a degree of that science if he hopes to have any success against Andrade, Canelo, or Triple G. Because based on that performance against Williams, I don't think he beats either of those three. I believe that, say, Williams being a pressure fighter, if Eubank Jr. fought this way against an elite pressure fighter like Gennady Golovkin, I think he'd be in some serious trouble at times, because there's just nothing particularly intelligent to Eubank Jr., or at least there wasn't in this fight. And yeah, I don't think Eubank is in good stead to beat those guys, unless he really catches them on an off day, because Eubank Jr. does have some considerable strengths. His athleticism is good. I don't think it's legendary or even elite, but I think it's good. His technique is still quite rough around the edges. It'll be interesting to see if it can improve as he goes forward with Roy Jones. And also, Eubank Jr. is it's just, there's a roughness, there's a technical inadequacy, like it's just strange, and it's not particularly high level. He's much better on the inside than he is at long range, and that's not really much of a secret, but the gap really is enormous between those two aspects. But as I said in the pre-fight video, he is looking to take his time a bit more at long range and think a bit more, and he was doing that here, but I just feel like the feints of Liam Williams unsettled Eubank, and that's what resulted in Eubank carrying, quote unquote, or seemingly carrying Williams. I believe he carried him in points, but I do think that Williams' feinting did kind of keep Eubank Jr. on edge, because he didn't really know how to combat the feints. He doesn't really know how to have a long distance kind of jab war or feinting war. He's very instinctive. As I say, there's not much science there. But yeah, check out the interview with George Groves on Boxing Social. As I say, I'll link it below. Pretty much, in my opinion, sums up the fight perfectly. Be interesting to see how Eubank Jr. does going forward. But I think I'm going to leave that there for now. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below. Where do you both guys go from here? Where does Eubank Jr. go? Where does Liam Williams go? Especially when Liam Williams looks so shaky. Technically look okay, look good, but punch resistance looks like it may be on the decline. Eubank Jr., who should he fight next? And how do you think he does against Andrade, Canelo and Triple G? Let me know. Leave it all in the comment section below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next video.